Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, May 11th. I'd like to talk a little bit about the two main avenues regarding the research that I'm undertaking that will ultimately compile the body of work that I'm working to create, that I'm in process of creating. And by and large, at least in the beginning, a lot of it is not my own creation so much as finding other resources and then connecting the dots. And for me, there seems to be, as I've come upon it, there seem to be two major planes, perhaps, of information. But before we get to that, I've mentioned it before, and this is the super critical part as a continual work, personal work, and preparation for anyone undergoing the journey here regarding discovery. And that is the understanding of the importance of psychology and inner reflection and what would be termed the inner work. And what I'm referring to regarding the psychology is if your enemy, if they understand how you work, how you operate, how you think, feel, function better than you do, they control you. Or at the very least, your control over yourself will be superseded by those that understand you better than you understand yourself. And within that concept of understanding yourself is knowing oneself, and that is directly hinged to the degree to which you can be honest with yourself. So an acceptance of personal truth, or the truth of oneself. You can pick any example. If you've got a bad habit and you pretend like it doesn't exist, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean the habit's bad and you can, compromise it away or whatever excuse you can come up with, but that doesn't change the fact. We'll just extrapolate that to a much larger scale. And if you are unwilling to recognize who and what you are, you cannot progress or advance beyond that, and therefore you will remain stagnant, and you can't, continue on this journey of understanding. And the reason they're able to capture and control so many people is the unwillingness of the common man or common woman to be able to admit to his or herself that they are likely and have been very likely wrong about many, many things in the past and in the current present. And since they don't want to acknowledge that, they are not in control of themselves because they are not being honest with themselves. So I could do a whole video on that, and I'll probably come up with a little more detailed, bulleted concepts regarding that. But that is, like, in my experience, the ultimate piece of preparation. And the final little aspect of that is the ability to accept that the information that you know can and is most likely incorrect, to not identify and attach oneself emotionally to these preconceived understandings, because then you can allow yourself to align with the truth and not to the attachment of having been right or wrong, and then you're able to advance oneself because you've unshackled from that paradigm. Okay. Now, before we get into the two planes of discovery, P-L-A-N-E, should probably step back and ask, although this is inferred for anyone that's on the journey of information, which is, why are we doing this? What are we seeking? All right. To embark on research is to better understand what's really going on, to seek truth, and in discovering truth, to not just align with it in this like vague metaphysical way, but to take actual action that is in accordance with what's really happening, so that ultimately, through the discovery of what is and isn't real, you can answer that big question everyone wants to know, is like, who am I and why am I here, right? We're here for a reason. And if you're not in that camp of thinking, I don't really think this channel's for you, but we are here for a reason, and we owe it to ourselves to discover why that is, and at the very least, not rest on our current understanding or belief structure of what that is. And I assure you, it is not simply to get a good job and make a lot of money or merely survive. There's a deeper reason here. So, in order to find the answers, one must go look for them, and where better to look for them than, I could say, the three dynamics of time, but we're not going to get into the future. So there's the present and the past. So here then are the two planes of discovery. Okay, the first one we'll just call history. And I like to break it down into segments, time periods. Of course, this is going to be coming from my time period, my life. Of course, it's 2023 right now. Should this video survive whatever's coming our way. So, first phase is current events and recent history. Recent history can be anything that happened in your lifetime. Before that, I would call it recent history, which I would see as going back to 1900 to World War II, somewhere around there. These are major events that kind of create these blocks of time in our mind, and if I see it this way, there's a good chance other people see it this way. And this has also been not just indoctrinated, but established with the methodology of how we were taught history in America in a public school, right? Okay, and then the major block of time before that would be, say, the creation of America or the Revolutionary War, and then before that, we're kind of lumping things into Renaissance, the Castle Age, Dark Ages. Then we've got this time period going back towards the year zero, quote, the time of Jesus, and then these time periods that some of us know about, loosely associated with like Greeks, Romans, before that the Egyptians, and then it kind of fades off, right? All right, so let's bring it back up to the first timestamp, first octave there, which would be current events and modern history, which again, as long as you've been alive, however long that is. All right, so, and I did a video on how do you know what's true, because ultimately, in order to validate the information that you come across so that you can take useful, truthful information and put it into action, transferring knowledge into wisdom so that you can ultimately do what you came here to do. Okay, you got to know, is the information I'm coming across accurate or not? Well, I think there's a old saying that goes something like, believe almost nothing you hear, some of what you read, and most of what you see, right? So, the easiest thing to validate is something you experience, which is why we're starting with current events and modern history, which deals with your lifetime, okay? Very interesting. Let me start getting into this. So, something happened to you. If you've got a decent memory, you can validate it, say, yeah, I ate a cheeseburger last week, extrapolate from there, okay? Now, what's so fascinating is the average person can logically and without distress admit that people have differing, not just opinions, but also accounts of what's going on here and now, right? The lens through which they see it. It's going to take some explaining. On the first layer, there would be an event where someone, a third party, can still objectively try to explain it. Perfect example. Pick a sporting event, football or soccer. And there's a foul on the field. Okay, person on the crowd for the one team is going to think it is a foul. The crowd on the other team is going to think it's not a foul because they're emotionally invested in the outcome of the significance of that call, right? Someone who doesn't give a shit about the game can objectively say, hey, look, there are two distinct perspectives of what just transpired, and then of course there's the truth of what happened or not. And because they don't care about the game, they can at least diagnose that exists and point that out to each side, and each side could probably say, yeah, I recognize that the fans of the other team would probably see it differently. Okay, now take that same idea and start to apply it to other things in your life. We've got the obvious duality in politics, right? And see, here now, there is the attachment to the personal ideology or the alignment with the ideology, perhaps, of that party, in which it is now more difficult to accept that the other party or the other side's point of view, yeah, you can say it exists, but you're not so willing to bring yourself to admit that they might have something right or correct, or that your party or something could be wrong, right? We bring it back to something a little more benign, like the call on the field. Maybe a fan of the one team would be like, yeah, maybe it wasn't a foul. All right. Let's now apply this to events in history, okay? Events in your modern history. Events that have transpired in the whole world, let's say, just in the last few years. Perhaps the virus that came about. There was, at the outset, a bifurcation and a relatively small group of people, at least from what was representative in the public, what you would see where you'd go places, people that were unwilling to wear a mask, etc. There was a small group from the outset that said, "No, this smells like bullshit. Not a fan, not going to do it. I don't think this is real." And then there was the majority that went along and get along. Okay, fast forward just to today, a few years, and I think anyone that's been following the story would say more people are now on the other side of that, or at the very least highly suspect of it. Did the events change? No. And we're not going to get into time travel here. What transpired since March of 2020 to today is what it is. That is the truth, that which is. Has the perception of people changed in regards to what was the impetus of the quarantine, the lockdown, etc.? Absolutely. And that has changed with the exacerbation of consequences regarding what is transpiring after the virus itself. And here again, I would be referring to the needlecraft that has popped up as a response to that. Okay, and the detriments of that are causing more people to say, hey, wait a second, this is going to probably be a long video, but it's very important to lay this foundation, because once you can get one thread, once I can get you to pull on one thread in a non-confrontational way, you can start ripping at the whole garment, okay? So if you can take one event, and of course I'm picking one that would be in the recent history of anyone today, and you can somewhat objectively say, yeah, okay, you very well might be in that camp where initially you're like, oh no, this is real, this is what's happening, and then suddenly you're on the other side and you're pulling on that thread. Okay. Hence it begs the question, was it just my interpretation, or was someone lying to me? Okay? And you can only keep your head in the sand for so long in that earth of ignorance and your willingness to make excuses for those other people, like, oh, they didn't know, they were just doing what they thought was best. You know, you're making all these excuses for them because you are unwilling. Let's now bring it back for the first time to the first point of the video. You are unwilling to admit to yourself that you could have been wrong. But given the what's on the line here, you know, perhaps suddenly dying if you received a certain type of needlecraft or what you've seen happening, you're jarred to the point where you're like, okay, there's a lot of us, we did not realize it. You're willing to change your tune, and it's easier right now because it's only been a relatively short amount of time. There's a lot of other people that were wrong, and so you're kind of in this group comfort where you can say, perhaps in this instance, yeah, I might have been wrong. That's okay. Look, my life is at stake. This is very important for me to know the truth. Now, I'm just using the virus because it's the most recent major event. And if that is the very, very, very beginning of your awakening, that's fine. You just got a long path to go. You can pick any event. What's important here is to recognize said event and see it as an archetype, the event or a event as an archetype of the manipulation that is happening constantly. Because if you can pull on that one thread and say, wow, and you come to this understanding like, I was lied to, we were lied to, what's attached to that is, what else have I been lied to about? Because again, you got to keep your head in the sand to think, this is the first time, right? And that's real intense cognitive dissonance to be able to accept you've been lied to on one occasion and then, throw that door back shut. Very hard to do that. So, another piece of this is the question of who and why are they lying? Okay? Who are these powers that be? Well, simply put, you can see they, as any person or a group of people that have control or take action that seeks to control other people. Okay? And this can be physical control or mental control. And control would be a very nice euphemism for the word slavery. But let's stick to control. So, who has control over other people right now? And we are not going to include in this group the child-parent dynamic. That is a different structure that we can look at another time. So we have, or you can use the word influence, which leads to control. Teachers, priests and clergy, government, politicians, bureaucrat, military, keep going down the list. These are people that have physical or mental control over others. No one's supposed to control another person. That is the whole idea of anarchy. No rulers. You are your own individual, sovereign ruler. Okay. And this is not a video about anarchy. But that's how you can recognize the who we are talking about. Okay? The question of why, a lot of reasons. You can think about them in their most basic form, right? So for some people, it's a response to, and as you go up the hierarchy of the form of control, I think there's greater culpability with it. For some people, it is a response to trauma that they've experienced, right? The bully on the playground that becomes the the more nefarious the intentions are, right? The desire to extract from other people their money, their time, so that they have power over them. We're treading now towards the psychopath that wants to be able to tell many other people what to do, or have the ability to remove the life of many other people. And ultimately, we're going to get up towards the high end of the reasons, which will connect us to the second plane of research, which would be regarding the off-planet entities, terms like energy harvesting, etc. Right? So there's this progression of ideas that one can wrap your mind around that explain why people are in positions of ill-gotten authority and seek to exert control, i.e. slavery, over other people, right? They're messed up in the head and they want to ultimately take the life force, whether it's through taxation or imprisonment, etc., of other humans. And of course, it's all wrong. That, of course, is a simplification of why they do it. Ultimately, you can see it as if you lie to enough people, you can manipulate their thoughts, emotions, and subsequent actions so that they do things that are beneficial for you, but not necessarily for them. So that begs the bigger question, well, why would anyone do that? Well, it's because there's a certain level and a certain amount of evil in this world and beyond that does not care about you and your loved ones. And those are the hallmark traits of people in control, okay? So we're not going to get super far down that path. All right, back to history. So if you pull on that first thread of something that you've experienced and you're able to see the truth of what is actually going on with it, now apply that to everything else you've been told. If they're willing to lie to you here and now, the logical man or woman has to see the preponderance of chance, the high likelihood that all other events in history have been distorted. Gotta have your head in the sand if you think this would be the first time. Okay? So suddenly you have to go turn over a lot of different rocks. Ask yourself, and just start with the events in your known lifetime, the modern history. Is what they say about Waco true? Is what they say about 9/11 true? Is what they say about World War I true? Is what they say, if that's in your recent lifetime, is what they say about how the stock market works true? Okay? Start turning over those rocks, those puzzle pieces, so you can get closer to the truth. Now we'll take it to the next phase of history, right? From before your lifetime, but still something you think you have a decent grasp on, is what they say about how our country got discovered and founded true. What do they have to gain by telling us the version that they tell us? Keep asking yourself that. What do I have to lose by believing things are this way? Then you can look at the current events in the current world and see the extreme poverty versus wealth, all these other stories that pop up in the news of how terrible things are other places, and say, well, someone is profiting or gaining an advantage from all this, but it's not me and it's not most people. Therefore, it would be suggestive that in manipulating the past, they are appropriately controlling the present for their gain, and it's not just a financial gain. again, what we're on this journey for is to discover who and what we really are. And if you allow yourself to define that answer based on your religion, we're going to have to revisit that first point of this video, which was don't get very attached to the things you already know, because it's all tainted. Okay, the explanation and the lies of history is very much interwoven with the same amount of deceit and treachery regarding the information and history of religion and the dogmas that have come out of that. Okay, all this has to come down. Why would they tell us this way? Okay, let's keep going back in time. Is what they tell me about the Dark Ages and the Renaissance true? Is what they tell me about the time period at year zero true? What existed before that? Before the creation of the three dominant religions that envelop this world in the vast majority of people's belief systems. Now, luckily, you don't have to do this all yourself. And what I mean is, there are some very, very good scholars today that have been working to uncover these truths and set them before the general public, so you can start connecting the dots regarding this history piece. A few of my favorites: Richard Grove, James Corbett, and probably one of my all-time favorite resources, Michael Tessarion. That's where I'm gleaning this understanding of the psychological piece. They're going in, they're turning over these stones and helping to share with us the other sides of these stories, these events, so that we can come to a better understanding of what actually unfolds. And they're doing this by digging into these often forgotten resources, authors, even in the last 100 years or from even longer ago than that. And as you get into this work, you realize there's a lot of people that have compiled and done a lot of individual research for many centuries, but it's information you never hear about in terms of public education, or private for that matter, mainstream news, even some of the alternative, right? Because if anyone presenting the information has any bias attached to an outcome, inherently the information shared will be shades, degrees away from the truth. And I think most people now most semi-awake people can accept that the mainstream media has a bias. Well, it's always been that way, it's just a little more obvious now, okay? So, that's the first plane of study, research, kind of summed up as history in its different chunks. You find the one thing that you've been able to allow yourself to change your mind on, something that you used to believe, and suddenly you're like, oh, no, I was wrong about that, whether it's the virus or 9/11 or whatever event was kind of your tipping point or catalyst, okay? And you start to apply that. You need to start applying that to all events in history, and in doing that, you're going to discover all these phenomenal resources that will help paint a clearer or more illuminating description of what has actually transpired, again, so that we can get closer to truth and the all-important truths of who are we and why are we here. Because if you're not curious about those two questions, then you're probably not watching this video. For me, and I think for many people who sit long enough, that is ultimately the quintessential question my mind, and on the far right side is like my current events in life. And it's kind of like a beam of light, fairly wide, and as it moves towards the left, it becomes more dispersed, more fragmented. Starts to intermix with darkness and shadow. Not even metaphorically, just literally, and it kind of peters out, right? And that's suggestive visually for me of like my known experiences and my hold on the truth of those, and the waning understanding as we go back in time, right? And kind of the capstone that I left off, or the bookend on the first plane of research, is after, I should say, before the year zero, people's thoughts and knowledge on history like diminishes really fast. It's like, yeah, there was the Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, maybe people are saying Sumerians, Phoenicians, whatever other groups might come to mind, biblical characters. And they'll kind of be like, yeah, I don't know, 10,000 BC, before that I have no idea, and science suggests there was Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon, and it just like, it drops off a cliff, right? And they got us really tied to the idea that we are ever evolving, despite our displays of civility in the modern age, as if we're evolving. So we're ready to accept the idea that we can't know before, that there was no real record, even though as you get into these real scholars, they're uncovering and displaying technologies that far exceed ours, vis-a-vis the construction of the pyramids, just to name one. All right. So that's kind of the bookend of the first plane. And now you have the second piece, which is the cosmic disclosure. Now, whereas the first one I saw as the beam of light moving from right to left, with the cosmic disclosure, I see it as over top, shining down. And they do overlap. The cosmic piece is just much larger, but because it's so new for most people, you can still picture it as a relatively small beam of light, and it's starting to overlap in that far left side, where our understanding and knowledge on history starts to wane out and dissipate. Now, the cosmic disclosure plane of research, I think for just about anyone, as you begin, it's going to sound like science fiction, it's going to sound like fantasy, it's going to sound impossible, until you spend some time with it. And again, we work back from our first thread of, well, if they lied about that, there's a good chance they've lied about everything else, and that would include what we think we know about way long ago history, our level of understanding of sciences, our belief in what does or does not exist out there, take anything religion says and just invert it, and that opens up its own can of worms that looks a lot like science fiction. The suggestions put out there by Hollywood, right? Are they pulling that from experience, or just pulling it out of the Hollywood creative mind, as pure entertainment? Now, this is where I'm spending the most of my time right now, is with the information coming from individuals regarding this cosmic disclosure piece. And this is even more difficult to validate for obvious reasons. It's dealing with things that otherwise sound unworldly. It's dealing with time periods that we know nothing about. It's positing ideas that we consider currently to be fictional, okay? And yet, if we allow ourselves to accept that we've been lied to about history as we understand it, and don't invite the idea that we've also probably been lied to about what exists outside of what we think we know, then we've really cut ourselves short, and we'll still not get to the core of the truth of who we are here if we don't invite in the conversation of this cosmic peace. Okay? So,